from 11 till 1, the final hours of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
High above the runway on the northern skyline, the big 707 has just turned on its landing lights and is hovering slowly over the runway, approaching the field from the north. The plane is nearing the end of the runway now, the landing lights on, and as it comes in slowly over the field, it will be only a matter of seconds now until it touches down. Coming down over the field, the nose high in the air, within seconds the plane should touch down on the runway. There, I believe, is the touchdown. The plane will travel down the runway where it will come to a point only a few yards from KXOL newsmen standing by at the scene. The president, as he flew into Fort Worth, got a view of the now famous gilded skyline of the city as the bright amber lights were turned on this afternoon. As the plane comes in now, he, of course, has a view of the city from the northwest looking toward the southeast. President and Mrs. Kennedy and their group have traveled well over 2,000 air miles today from Washington to San Antonio to Houston and finally to Fort Worth here tonight. That has been since about 10 o'clock this morning. In addition to those 2,000 some odd air miles, they've traveled about 80 miles in automobiles and the various caravans throughout San Antonio and Houston. President Kennedy has made two speeches. Mrs. Kennedy has made one speech in Spanish. There have been countless numbers of handshakes, all since 10 o'clock this morning. If you think you've been busy today, what do you think about the President and Mrs. Kennedy?
Tonight is the climax to a long period of events. The talk of Kennedy's visit first started in June of this year when the Tarrant County Central Labor Council invited him to visit the city last Labor Day and make a major address. Well, that didn't materialize. More talk cropped up in August. Finally, Governor John Connally announced September 28th that Kennedy would tour the state. Then later word came that the tour would include Fort Worth. Tonight, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, along with the First Lady and accompanying party, will make it the 8th time that the nation's chief executive has visited Fort Worth. Others have visited here before, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Eisenhower, but not during their presidential terms. Kennedy did make a motor stop here during his campaign in 1960. The speech was at Burnett Park downtown. Texas, of course, figures by many political observers to be a key state in the 1964 presidential campaign. Kennedy, you may recall, won it by a slim margin of 46,000 votes in 1960. And as you probably are well aware of at this time, there is considerable talk of a break in the state Democratic Party, some factions to the conservative and the liberal side. Kennedy perhaps making this as more or less a fact-finding mission to try to unify this split in the party in anticipation of perhaps his running for re-election in 1964. Of course, he has not officially made any announcement to that start. He told a news conference only last week that he thought he would wait a while because he felt that he announced his candidacy for election as president a bit premature in 1960. Now we go to Jerry Hahn on the flight line itself.
At least 5,000 people, perhaps more, gathered here at Carswell Air Force Base for the arrival of the President's plane. Very clearly, on the side of this giant 707, we can see the seal of the President of the United States. This plane is fastened so close to us that we're quite sure that you can hear the roar of the jet. Matter of fact, the wingtip of the plane will just about pass almost over our head. And we stand here viewing this flight station machinery carrying the President of the United States along with Mrs. Kennedy and the rest of his group. You can hear the roar of the jet now. The plane is very close to us. If we were able to reach high enough, we would be able to touch the tip of the wing as it floats very slowly over us. And as they prepare to push the loading ramp up to the door of the plane, we will in just a moment see the President of the United States along with Mrs. Kennedy and the rest of the party in this group. And we expect to see them in just a moment. A beautiful blue, white, and silver airplane. And here comes President Kennedy now, as you can hear. And here comes Mrs. Kennedy preceding the President down the ramp onto the flight line here at Carswell Air Force Base. Immediately following him is Congressman Jim Wright. And then comes Governor of Texas, John Connally, and the rest of the dignitaries in this group. Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy now at the bottom of the loading ramp, being greeted by the Fort Worthians who are on hand for the occasion. Mrs. Kennedy being presented at the moment with a huge bouquet of red roses. The President of the United States wearing a dark blue suit. Mrs. Kennedy wearing what looks like to be a black velvet outfit. Very attractive. Neither of them wearing a hat at the moment. We understood that Mrs. Kennedy was wearing a hat earlier in the day, but she has forgotten that for this evening on this beautiful night here in Fort Worth. And now once again, as Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy get out into full view of the crowd, quite a roar goes up from the many thousands who are gathered here as they step just a very few feet to the lead car in the caravan that will proceed to downtown, which is a cream-colored Lincoln Continental convertible.
Some smattering of hand clapping coming from the still a rather large reception here on the flight line as the motorcade proceeds slowly from the sleek-looking presidential jet, which has a very huge American flag on the tail of the huge craft, and then on the side along the fuselage, the United States of America in big, bold blue letters. Let's switch over to the Texas Hotel and Dick Mahan. As Jerry has told you, the presidential party has arrived, and from our vantage point, we see them pulling now. First, the phalanx of motorcycle officers pulling in front of the Texas Hotel with their red lights ablaze. The Secret Service men are conspicuous. They are breaking a small path in the crowd for the president, who has not yet stopped in front of the hotel. The car is arriving. You possibly can hear the crowd. Secret Service men have jumped out of the lead car. The door is being opened at this moment, and out steps the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He is followed immediately by the very gracious First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. He is walking, instead of to the hotel, he's walking across the street, shaking hands. The crowd swirls around him. He's enveloped in a sea of appreciative humanity, many of them hollering, "I see him, I see him." They are being greeted by him. The president is personally shaking hands, exchanging greetings with many of the thousands, literally thousands of Fort Worth citizens who have come out to greet him on this crisp, beautiful night here in the Gateway City. The presidential party is moving up and down. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, the congressional delegation, Governor Conley, they're all greeting the community, much to the consternation of the Secret Servicemen, who would much rather the president go immediately inside the hotel. We have momentarily lost the president. He has literally been engulfed by Fort Worth citizens. We believe now that he is being led toward the hotel entrance. We see the cameraman's lights. There is the president. Possibly again you can hear it. The crowd, the appreciative roar of Fort Worth citizens. The president is moving in. Jacqueline Kennedy smiling brilliantly. The glitter of downtown Fort Worth, decorated for Christmas, pales in comparison to the radiance of the first family. They're moving very, very slowly, taking time to chat with the citizens. They are moving inside the door. They have not yet actually entered the hotel. They've been stopped again, talking, greeting the citizens of Fort Worth. We can see Jacqueline saying, "How are you? So glad to see you." They still are outside the door, have not yet gone in. Inside the hotel, KXOL's Bill Hicks will have a report. The first family and the congressional party is now moving inside. We will move the KXOL microphones inside and turn them over to Bill Hicks.
As the flashbulbs pop, President and Mrs. Kennedy have now made their entrance into the lobby of the Hotel Texas. The crowd estimated here between 300 and 400. The television lights keep blaring in their eyes as they make their way up the steps, turn to their right, and head down to the end of the lobby, where they will enter elevator number 3, and the elevator operator will take them up to Suite 850, known hereafter as the Presidential Suite, on the 8th floor, where he will spend the night.
Despite an ominously threatening sky and a steady drizzle, an ever-swelling crowd has gathered on the parking lot across from the front entrance to the Hotel Texas to see and hear President Kennedy. The parking lot has been transformed into a sea of umbrellas and rain hats. Police estimates of the crowd range upwards of 4,000, a surprisingly large number considering the weather. Clearing skies had been promised by the weatherman, but at this point they have not materialized. Policemen have been stationed on the roofs of each multi-story building on the 4 sides of the parking lot, each armed with a rifle and carrying a portable two-way police radio. They are conspicuous. Not quite so conspicuous, but nonetheless there, the scores of Secret Servicemen and local lawmen in plain clothes mingled into the crowd. Persons of all races and walks of life have gathered to hear their president.
The attire ranges from denim and flannel to diamonds and fur. There's some activity around the entrance to the Hotel Texas now. A path is being cleared. Yes, there he is. There is President John F. Kennedy. Listen to that crowd. Much to the consternation of the Secret Service, the President has broken away from their protection and is mingling with the crowd, shaking hands, smiling the famous JFK smile. You can see him saying, "Thank you, thank you." Now he's approaching the platform, especially constructed for his speech. He's climbing the short stairway. Listen to the roar of approval. He's waving. Now here to introduce the President, U.S. Congressman Jim Wright.
Friends, this is the proudest day in the history of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. And now it is my high honor and great privilege to present to you the greatest Texan of them all, who has reflected more glory and credit upon the Lone Star State, done more good for the Lone Star State, served the nation more admirably than any other Texan in the history of our state, the Vice President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. Congressman Wright, Mr. President, Senator Yarber, Governor Connolly, ladies and gentlemen, it is my high honor and my great privilege to present to the good people of Fort Worth our able, our beloved, our fearless leader of the United States and all the free world, the President of the United States. Mr. Vice President, Jim Wright, Governor, Senator Yarborough, Mr. Buck, ladies and gentlemen, there are no faint hearts in Fort Worth, and I appreciate your being here this morning. Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself. It takes longer. But, of course, she looks better than we do when she does it. But we appreciate your welcome. This city's been a great western city. The defense of the West, cattle, oil, and all the rest. It has believed in strength in this city, and strength in this state, and strength in this country. What we're trying to do in this country and what we're trying to do around the world, I believe, is quite simple. And that is to build a military structure which will defend the vital interests of the United States. And in that great cause, Fort Worth, as it did in World War II, as it did in developing the best bomber system in the world, the B-58, and as it will now do in developing the best fighter system in the world, the TFX, Fort Worth will play its proper part. And that is why we have placed so much emphasis in the last 3 years in building a defense system second to none. Until now, the United States is stronger than it's ever been in its history. And secondly, we believe that the new environment, space, the new sea, is also an area where the United States should be second to none. And this state of Texas and the United States is now engaged in the most concentrated effort in history to provide leadership in this area as it must here on Earth. And this is our second great effort. And next December, next month, the United States will fire the largest booster in the history of the world, putting us ahead of the Soviet Union in that area for the first time in our history. And thirdly, for the United States to fulfill its obligations around the world requires that the United States move forward economically, that the people of this country participate in rising prosperity. And it is a fact in 1962 and the first 6 months of 1963, the economy of the United States grew not only faster than nearly every Western country, which had not been true in the 50s, but also grew faster than the Soviet Union itself. That's the kind of strength the United States needs, economically, in space, militarily. And in the final analysis, that strength depends upon the willingness of the citizens of the United States to assume the burdens of leadership. I know one place where they are. Here in this rain, in Fort Worth, in Texas, in the United States, we're going forward. Thank you.
Entering the Grand Ballroom here at Hotel Texas is the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He has just entered from a door to our right, which leads from the hotel kitchen. Secret Service men obviously believing the shortest distance is the safest. The President is smiling and shaking hands as he makes his way across the ballroom to the head table, a distance of perhaps 75 feet. Mr. Kennedy is wearing a dark blue suit with what appears to be a dark blue tie and a white shirt. Let's see if we can pick up the music of the TCU Horn Frog Band.
First of all, it is a personal pleasure for me to present the most gallant, able Texan of them all, one who has done so much for Texas and America, the distinguished Vice President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. And his lovely wife, companion, Lady Bird. We have had many able congressmen from this district, none of which have ever surpassed in dedication, loyalty, and capability to country and to district, the Honorable Jim Wright. Now is an event that I know all of you have been waiting for.
Now entering the ballroom is Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, looking radiantly beautiful. The crowd obviously pleased with what they see and deciding it was well worth the wait. Mrs. Kennedy is wearing a pink suit with a dark velvet collar and a matching dark shoes. She's now crossing the ballroom, taking her place at the head table between Mr. Kennedy and the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson. Now back to the rostrum.
There is always something that adds beauty, life, and touch to the lives of people. No one in our time has done more in that respect than the lovely, beautiful First Lady of our land. The city where the West begins is the most important and the most honored city in the world. Our great, courageous, and brilliant leader of the world's strongest nation, its greatest power for peace and for freedom. He has honored us with his presence and that of the charming and lovely First Lady. Our hearts and our arms are open to you. May God bless you and cause his light to shine on you and on your companions and your family. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the President of the United States.
I know now why everyone in Texas, Fort Worth, is so thin, having gotten up and down about 9 times. This is what you do every morning. Mr. Buck, Mr. Vice President, Governor Conley, Senator Yarborough, Jim Wright, members of the congressional delegation, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. 2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas. Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear, but with I'm glad to be here in Jim Wright City. About 35 years ago, a congressman from California, just been elected, received a letter from an irate constituent which said, during your campaign, you promised to have the Sierra Madre Mountains reforested. You've been in office for 1 month and you haven't done so. Well, no one in Fort Worth has been that unreasonable, but in some ways he has had the Sierra Madre Mountains reforested. And here in Fort Worth, he's contributed to its growth. He speaks for Fort Worth, and he speaks for the country. And I don't know any city that's better represented in the Congress of the United States than Fort Worth. And if there are any Democrats here this morning, I'm sure you won't hold that against them. 3 years ago, last September, I came here on the Vice President and spoke at Burke Burnett Park. And I called in that speech for a national security policy and a national security system which was second to none. A position which said not first but, if, when, and how, but first. That city responded to that call as it has through its history. And we have been putting that pledge into practice ever since. And I want to say a word about that pledge here in Fort Worth, which understands national defense and its importance to the security of the United States. During the days of the Indian War, this city was a fort. During the days of World War I, even before the United States got into the war, Royal Canadian Air Force pilots were training here. During the days of World War II, the great Liberator bombers, on which my brother flew with his co-pilot from this city, were produced here. First non-stop flight around the world took off and returned here in a plane built in factories here. The first truly intercontinental bomber, the B-36, was produced here. The B-58, which is the finest weapon system in the world today, which it demonstrated most recently in flying from Tokyo to London with an average speed of nearly 1,000 miles per hour, is a Fort Worth project. The Iroquois helicopter from Fort Worth is a mainstay in our fight against the guerrillas in South Vietnam. The transportation of crews between our missile sites is done in planes produced here in Fort Worth. So wherever the confrontation may occur, and in the last 3 years it's occurred at least 3 occasions, in Laos, in Berlin, and in Cuba, and it will again, wherever it occurs, the products of Fort Worth and the men of Fort Worth provide us with a sense of security. And in the not too distant future, a new Fort Worth product. And I'm glad that there was a table separating Mr. Hicks and myself, a new Fort Worth product. The TFX, Tactical Fighter Experimental. Nobody knows what those words mean, but that's what they mean. Tactical fighter experimental will serve the forces of freedom and will be the #1 airplane in the world today. There's been a good deal of discussion of the long and hard-fought competition to win the TFX contract, but very little discussion about what this plane will do. It will be the first operational aircraft ever produced that can literally spread its wings through the air. It will thus give us a single plane capable of carrying out missions of speed as well as distance, able to fly very far in one form or very fast in another. It can take off from rugged, short airstrips, enormously increasing the Air Force's ability to participate in limited wars. The same basic plane will serve the Navy's carriers, saving the taxpayers at least $1 billion in cost if they built separate planes for the Navy and the Air Force. The government of Australia, by purchasing $125 million of TFX planes before they are even off the drawing boards, has already testified to the merit of this plane, and at the same time, it's confident in the ability of Fort Worth to meet its schedule. In all these ways, the success of our national defense depends upon this city in the western United States, 10,000 miles from Vietnam, 5,000 or 6,000 miles from Berlin, thousands of miles from trouble spots in Latin America and Africa or the Middle East. And yet Fort Worth and what it does and what it produces participates in all these great historic events. Texas as a whole and Fort Worth bear particular responsibility for this national defense effort. For military procurement in this state totals nearly $1.25 billion, fifth highest among all the states of the Union. There are more military personnel on active duty in this state than any in the nation save one, and it's not Massachusetts. Any in the nation save one with a combined military-civilian defense payroll of well over $1 billion. I don't recite these for any partisan purpose. They're the result of American determination to be second to none. And as a result of the effort which this country has made in the last 3 years, we are second to none. In the past 3 years, we have increased the defense budget of the United States by over 20%, increased the program of acquisition for Polaris submarines from 24 to 41, increased our Minuteman missile purchase program by more than 75%, doubled the number of strategic bombers and missiles on alert, doubled the number of nuclear weapons available in the strategic alert forces, increased the tactical nuclear forces deployed in Western Europe by over 60%, added 5 combat-ready divisions to the armies of the United States and 5 tactical fighter wings to the Air Force of the United States, increased our strategic airlift capability by 75%, and increased our special counterinsurgency forces, which are engaged now in South Vietnam, by 600%. I hope those who want a strong America and place it on some signs will also place those figures next to it. This is not an easy effort. This requires sacrifice by the people of the United States. But this is a very dangerous and uncertain world. As I said earlier, on 3 occasions in the last 3 years, the United States has had a direct confrontation. No one can say when it will come again. No one expects that our life will be easy. Certainly not in this decade, and perhaps not in this century. But we should realize what a burden and responsibility the people of the United States have borne for so many years. Here, a country which lived in isolation, divided and protected by the Atlantic and the Pacific, uninterested in the struggles of the world around it. Here, in the short space of 18 years after the Second World War, we put ourselves by our own will and by necessity into defensive alliances with countries all around the globe. Without the United States, South Vietnam would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the SEATO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, the CENTO alliance would collapse overnight. Without the United States, there would be no NATO, and gradually Europe would drift into neutralism and indifference. Without the effort of the United States and the Alliance for Progress, the communist advance onto the mainland of South America would long ago have taken place. So this country, which desires only to be free, which desires to be secure, which desires to live at peace for 18 years under 3 different administrations, has borne more than its share of the burden, has stood watch for more than its number of years. I don't think that we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. The communist balance of power is still strong. The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone and the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead. So I'm glad to come. I'm glad to come to this state, which has played such a significant role in so many efforts in this century, and to say that here in Fort Worth, you people will be playing a major role in the maintenance of the security of the United States for the next 10 years. I'm confident, as I look to the future, that our chances for security, our chances for peace, are better than they've been in the past. And the reason is because we're stronger. And with that strength is a determination to not only maintain the peace, but also the vital interests of the United States. To that great cause, Texas and the United States are committed. Thank you.
Mr. President, your visit with us in Fort Worth today, the things you have said have refreshed and renewed our appreciation of your great leadership and courage. You have brought rain to moisten our pastures and our fields. You have brought sunshine in our hearts. We know that you don't wear a hat. We couldn't let you leave Fort Worth without providing you with some protection against the rain.
Put it on in the White House on Monday. If you'll come up there, you'll have a chance to see it there.
And to protect you against local enemies in the manner that you are protecting this nation against our foreign enemies, and to keep the rattlesnakes on Vice President Johnson's ranch from striking you, we want to present this pair of boots. We won't ask you to put them on. Here. And Mrs. Kennedy, as you ride to the hounds or walk to the rattlesnakes, we want you to have protection too. Dr. Granville Walker.
Let us be in the spirit of prayer. The Lord bless all nations with a desire for peace. The Lord bless our own beloved nation with rectitude and prosperity, and grant us to achieve justice for all within it. The Lord bless our President and all in places of responsibility with wisdom and with health equal to their tasks. And now the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace both now and forever. Amen.
Smiling and apparently pleased, President and Mrs. Kennedy then left the Hotel Texas and traveled to Carswell Air Force Base, where they boarded the presidential jetliner for the short flight to Dallas. Upon arrival at Love Field in Dallas, the president and his wife were greeted by a large group of well-wishers. Following a brief reception at the airport, the presidential motorcade began the triumphant trip to the downtown area. The bright Texas sun seemed to reflect the warm reception the president was receiving in this politically hostile center of extremism. Cheering, waving Dallas citizens lined the route of the motorcade. As the presidential party approached the intersection of Elm and Houston on the western edge of the business district, seemingly from nowhere, 3 shots cracked above the roar of the crowd. Like pebbles tossed into a pond, the effects would be never-ending. Bulletin, KXOL, Information 24 News Bulletin.
Here is a bulletin from Dallas. President Kennedy was shot today, just as his motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed Mr. Kennedy. She cried, "Oh no!" The motorcade sped on.
Here in Dallas, an incident is yet unexplained as the president made his way here to Market Hall, at Houston and Elm, at an underpass just before we went on to the Stemmons Freeway. A shot, or a series of shots, rang out. The presidential car took off quickly, and since then we have had no word as to exactly what happened. A man, a woman, and a child seen lying on the ground, the man beating his head against the ground in disgust. It's not known exactly what has happened, whether the president is safe or not. His car took off at a high rate of speed. The president of the United States and the governor of Texas, both according to Senator Ralph Yarborough, gravely wounded, have been rushed here to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. It all happened at Elm in Houston, a familiar underpass, very familiar to Fort Worth residents, which links the downtown area of Dallas with the turnpike and the Stemmons Freeway. As the president's car, carrying the president, Mrs. Kennedy, and Governor Connolly started under that underpass, 3 shots were heard. Senator Ralph Yarborough, to whom we talked a moment ago, described them as louder than pistol shots. He said that immediately the Secret Service man in his automobile told him, "Get down, get down, get down," and made the Vice President, Mr. Yarborough, and Mrs. Johnson lie flat in the floor of their car. The lead cars in the motorcade took off at a high rate of speed. Secret Service men clinging on for their lives as they went beneath the underpass and out the Stemmons Freeway to Parkland Hospital. According to Senator Yarborough, both the governor and the president were carried into the hospital. Mrs. Kennedy, he said, walked in. We asked him how the president and the governor looked to him and how he would describe the incident. He said, "It's too horrible to describe. They were seriously injured." Here at the hospital, we still have no word on the fate of these 2 great leaders. But at the moment, Dallas police pressing an all-out search for a would-be assassin at an underpass here in Dallas. Truly, the eyes of the nation at this moment rest upon Parkland Hospital, the eyes of the free world also at this spot in Texas. The saddening scene here at Parkland Hospital at the emergency entrance, Senator Ralph Yarborough standing, staring at the door through which the president and the governor were carried minutes ago, tears running down the cheeks of the senator from Texas. Congressman Jim Wright, his voice breaking, told this reporter this is a tragic thing for America. If it should have to have reached the point where the president and the governor cannot go among their people. He said, apparently, too long, people have been taught to hate and have not been taught the proper respect for the high offices of our land. Congressmen leaning into cars, listening to radios, each one not knowing what is happening inside the emergency room here at Parkland. Blood rushed into the emergency room a short time ago. The president and the governor, of course, both wounded. Senator Ralph Yarborough told us it was too horrible to describe. He refused to say more. Senator Yarborough was close to the Kennedy's vehicle. He was riding with the Vice President and Mrs. Johnson. when 3 shots rang out near the underpass at Houston and Elm on the western edge of downtown Dallas. Senator Yarborough said the Secret Service men riding in their cars said, "Get down, get down, get down," and the 3 of them went for the floor. They stayed there as their cars picked up speed, hitting terrific speeds going up the Stemmons Freeway until they pulled into the emergency entrance here at Parkland. The First Lady of our land walked into the hospital, undoubtedly gravely aware of the condition of her husband. The President, we know, is still alive. The exact extent of his injuries we do not know. But the scene here at Parkland Hospital is one of waiting and one, we must say, of prayer. On the front steps of the hospital, an elderly woman, here on other things, standing there with tears running down her cheeks, she was praying, her hands in a prayerful position. The President of the United States and the Governor of Texas, both wounded by an assassin's bullets in Dallas, Texas today. No official information on the condition of the President or the Governor. No official statements as yet, except for one terse statement from a White House spokesman who said the President is alive. In front of Parkland Hospital now, a huge crowd gathering. However, the police are attempting to move these people on, keep them out of the way. In a room here on the first floor of the hospital, a temporary press room being set up. Telephone company rushing mobile units and telephone installation men here to this point. This is suddenly the most crucial spot in the world. The leader of the most powerful nation in the free world, John F. Kennedy, lies wounded in this hospital. His exact condition unknown. At the back of the hospital, his car has been moved away. The bubble top was placed on it. It's a bulletproof bubble top. It was placed on it, unfortunately, too late, and moved away from the hospital here. A large crowd, hundreds, thousands of persons gathered at the Market Hall here in Dallas, undoubtedly have been told now what has happened. For a time they were waiting. We heard a police radio crackling saying that Mr. Kroll, the city manager, wanted to know if Mr. Kennedy would be able to attend the luncheon today. Obviously, he will not. Parkland Hospital handling this thing surprisingly well. People in the offices here adapting quite well to a sudden flood of reporters grabbing for telephones, trying to inform the nation and the world of this, perhaps the greatest story of this century here at Parkland Hospital.
Police Chief Buddy McGill reported today 3 telephone threats were made against the life of President Kennedy before the president's arrival in Houston yesterday. McGill said, "We attribute these things to pranks, but it always scares us to death. I really have never stopped shaking the whole time he was here." Dick Mahan has further detail.
In Washington, Senator Edward Kennedy, the president's brother, was presiding over the Senate today when word came that the president had been shot. An aide informed him. He rushed from the Senate chamber. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's younger brother and closest advisor, was having lunch at home when word of his brother's shooting reached him. Kennedy's personal secretary said the attorney general was remaining in the Kennedy Hickory Hill estate in McLean, Virginia. Usman carried the word to the House Speaker, John McCormick, at the luncheon table. "This is terrible," he said in an almost inaudible voice. "All I can say is that it is a terrible thing, and all Americans of all religions and faiths are praying for the president and Governor Conley." The Associated Press quotes 2 priests in Dallas as saying that Kennedy is dead. There is no confirmation. This is the Associated Press quoting 2 priests as saying President Kennedy is dead, repeating no confirmation of this information.
A flash on the Associated Press wire. 2 priests now say that President Kennedy is dead, and it happened in Dallas, Texas.
This urgent bulletin from Washington, government sources are quoted as saying President Kennedy is dead. This seems to be the official word.
A few moments ago, a member of the White House staff walked into the newsroom here at Parkland Hospital and announced President John F. Kennedy died at 1 p.m. today in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. And he said, "I have nothing more to say." The gentleman, close to the president, obviously on the verge of tears as he made the statement. We have received word that the governor was wounded twice. His exact condition not known at this moment. The hospital in a state of shock and can't believe it happened, first of all, and secondly, they can't believe it happened in Dallas. But it has. An assassin's bullet has claimed the life of the President of the United States. Lyndon Johnson, the Vice President, who was riding in a car, 2 cars behind that of the President, separated from him only by a Secret Service automobile, now becomes the President of our country. Mr. Johnson and his wife, along with Senator Ralph Yarborough, leaped into the floorboard of their automobile when a Secret Service agent shouted to them, "Get down, get down, get down." the president's car from the intersection of Elm and Houston where the shooting occurred drove directly to this hospital. We are told that the shot was fired from one of the upper floors of a downtown building. That perhaps we have more on at the newsroom. These details are very sketchy here at the hospital. The press room is being set up here in the hospital now. We expect further and more full information very shortly. Mrs. Kennedy, of course, as we said in an earlier broadcast, walked into the hospital. She's somewhere in this building now. We'll have further reports for you as the afternoon goes along. Our other staff members now arriving here at Parkland Hospital in Dallas. And repeating that statement from the White House, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy died at 1 p.m. today in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain.
It's now 3 p.m. It has been 2 hours since the President of the United States was assassinated. We have a direct report from KXOL News at Love Field.
The President of the United States is now the Honorable Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas. Mr. Johnson took the oath of office at 2:39 this afternoon aboard the presidential plane parked here at Love Field. The oath of office was administered by Federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes of Dallas, who was appointed a short time ago to the bench by the late President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Mr. Johnson repeated these words: I do solemnly swear that I will perform the duties of the President of the United States to the best of my abilities and defend, protect, and preserve the Constitution of the United States. A black Bible was used in the swearing-in ceremony. On the new president's left stood the widow of President Kennedy, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, still wearing the raspberry-colored dress which she had worn coming in to Dallas. Her left leg, her stocking saturated with blood from one of the two men in the automobile. According to a pool reporter, it was quite obvious that Mrs. Kennedy had been crying and crying quite hard. He said that the compartment of the presidential plane where the swearing-in ceremony took place was jammed with people, about 25 to 30 persons in that compartment. He said that Mrs. Kennedy came in unassisted just before the oath was administered. She stood at President Johnson's left. Mrs. Johnson stood at her husband's right. Immediately after the ceremony, the new president embraced Mrs. Kennedy, embraced his wife, and embraced a third woman, the president's secretary, President Kennedy's secretary, who was also present at the ceremonies. The plane then took off. The body of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was aboard the plane when it took off for Washington. President Johnson had nothing to say, no comment after the swearing-in, except, okay, let's get this plane back to Washington. A sad flight for the nation's top executives. This is Bruce Neal with Russ Bloxham and Jerry Hahn at Love Field.